What is going on, basketball lovers and hoop heads? Welcome back to the Checkup Basketball Podcast, where I'm your host, Bryce, here as always to take you through the week that was in the NBA. But unfortunately, as you damn well may know, there was no week that was in the NBA. There was no basketball this week, and so instead I have come up with a topic to talk over today as we enter the home stretch run of the NBA season. I went ahead and decided on an overall topic to talk about today rather than my usual, big news and takeaways that I would typically do, because there's nothing to take away and there's not really any big news. There's tanking stuff going on. We got a report from Shams today that, basically Adam Silver talked to all the GMs and they're going to make some anti-tanking rule changes in the offseason. But I've had enough tanking talk, and that's not very interesting. We can talk about it when those things actually happen. So instead, today, I wanted to talk about, or rather give an update to, as I've said I would many times, but have actually done the work this time, give an update to my championship tiers list that I created back in December. If you are unfamiliar with what this was, basically, I wanted to come up with a ways to statistically categorize what teams we should care about as contenders. Most podcasters, most media people, whoever they may be, spend a lot of time making top 10 lists, top 5 lists. Who are your contenders? Who could win a championship? Blah, blah, blah. But I wanted to go do some research and find out historically what actually makes a contender, because we could talk all day about theoretical contenders. At the end of the day, it really only ends up being, I feel like, a pool of 2 to 3 teams that realistically can win a championship. So I wanted to The idea behind this is that I wanted to create a stat, or like a probability rating meter for champions, and be able to apply that to teams in a modern context. I haven't gone that far, but I have created a rating or ranking system, which was good enough for now and will make plenty of sense, and is hopefully somewhat enlightening to you. Now, let's go ahead real quick. Let's talk about what this rating system is, like how it works. So what I did was I picked the last 15 years of champions, and I looked back historically at their rankings in 4 different categories. The 4 categories I picked are real simple. Were offensive rating, defensive rating, net rating, and winning percentage. So, the percentage of their games that they win. And I looked at that, and I found each of those rankings for each of the last 15 champions. 15 felt like we included enough. Like, that felt kind of like the modern basketball era, I guess, to me, like around 2010. And on is when things started to change a little bit. So back to what I was saying. I picked the ranking for all of these champions, and then I averaged them out. And then I went to today's rankings for these specific stats, and I said, okay, if for example, the average champion over the last 15 years had a top 6 offense. Well, let's see who has a top 6 offense right now and who doesn't. And then I kind of just ranked a theoretical pool of contenders based on that, like how many of these criteria that they met. And I'll expand on that in a little bit. I want to talk about the pool of contenders that I had picked. This time, my pool of contenders, I slimmed down a little bit, and as we'll get to the end of this, I have slimmed down even further to a very small pool at this point in the season. But the pool of contenders that I had for this thought experiment this time around was OKC, Houston, Denver, San Antonio, New York, the New York Knicks, Cleveland, Detroit, Minnesota, and Boston. That's a pool of 9 teams that I feel like I hear most media people talk about as theoretical contenders, right? The 2 teams I removed from this thought experiment that were in it the first time were Orlando and the Los Angeles Lakers. Both of those teams, the Lakers are the 5th seed, but there's a lot of indicators that they're really just not a good team. I think they have the 23rd ranked defense. Like, they have a really particularly bad defense, and a team that's the worst defense to win a championship over the last 15 years was like the 14th ranked defense. So particularly bad. They also, I think, have a below 500 record against teams with the top 10 point differential. There's a lot of things you can point to that just say they're not contenders, and I just don't think they are. Despite how many games they won, despite the fact that they're like the 5th seed, it doesn't matter to me. And Orlando has obviously been a dumpster fire in the East. They are not anything close to resembling a contender. So I eliminated them from the pool immediately and did not use them or their rankings in this thought experiment. All right, so let's go over the stats and what ranking you quote-unquote need to be and what the average ranking for each of these stats is. So over the last 15 years, the team with the worst offensive rating to win a championship had the 17th ranked offense, but the average offense for an NBA champion over that time was 6th, and the median is actually 5. So for the most part, you kind of need to have a top 5 offense to win a championship. Defense is even more strict. The worst rated defense to win a championship in the last 15 years was 16. The average rating for that was also 6th, but the median was 4, which means more like high-level, top-end regular season defenses win the championship than high-level regular season offenses. Interesting. Net rating, the lowest rated net rating team to win a championship over the last 15 years was 8. So historical precedent says you need a top 8 net rating to win a championship. The average rating was 3rd, and the median was also 3rd. So net rating is a pretty hefty indicator that you gotta have a damn good net rating if you want to win the championship. You need to probably be top 3 really to be considered as a championship contender, which is interesting. That obviously significantly reduces our pool that we could pick from. And then winning percentage, the lowest winning percentage in champions over the last 15 years was 64%. That's 53 games. So bare minimum, bar none, you need to win 53 games. The average rating was 72.5, and the median was 70%. So that's like right around 57 to 58 games. Is right around what the average champion wins. And that's also going to be a thing that kicks out a lot of available teams, as we'll see here in a minute. A couple of things that I've added this time. There is just kind of a rule. I don't know since when, but it's since like a long time ago, maybe even before like the arbitrary 1980, like when the 3-point line got added. Historical marker that a lot of media people use. It's been a long time since a team that was not a top 3 seed won the championship. So again, historical precedent. I don't know the exact statistic, the exact number, but it's high, like 95, 98%, maybe 100% of teams outside of like 1 or 2 in NBA history have ever been below a top 3 seed and won the championship. That's another big one. And then we should also talk about Phil Jackson's 40-20 rule. If you're not familiar with this, Phil Jackson kind of just came up with this arbitrary stat that champions always win 40 games before they lose 20. And that has carried out with a 90% historical accuracy. So it can happen. There is a 10% of the time that a team that doesn't win 40 games before it loses 20 wins the championship. But 90% of the time, the champion wins 40 games before they lose 20. And that will also be illuminating later. So let's jump into this. Let's dive through what my findings were this time around. Okay? Since I've added a couple things, made this a little more strict and stringent, or at least tried to. Yeah, let's just dive into my findings. So, we have our pool of teams that I talked about. Teams within the top 6 of offensive rating right now are the Nuggets, Knicks, Celtics, Spurs, Thunder, and Cavs. And the teams that are not within the top 6 are the Timberwolves, Pistons, and Rockets. Okay? The defensive rating, teams within the top 6 are OKC, the Thunder, the Rockets, the Pistons, and the Spurs. The teams that are not in the top 6 are the Cavs, the Wolves, the Knicks, the Nuggets. The Nuggets are currently 24th in defensive rating, and the Celtics. Okay? And then let's move on to net rating. For net rating, instead of going average and below, because that would significantly reduce our pool of candidates here, I went ahead and listed teams that were in the top 8 in net rating, just to expand our pool a little bit more. And there have been plenty of teams that were like the fourth best net rating or whatever. But the teams within the top 8 are the Thunder, Pistons, and Celtics, which are 1, 2, and 3, by the way. So if you want to go more stringent and you want to say the average champion was top 3, the top 3 are currently the Thunder, the Pistons, and the Celtics. And then the rest of the top 8 is actually the rest of our pool. So it's the Knicks, Wolves, Spurs, Rockets, Cavs. The one team that is not top 8 in net rating, also the Denver Nuggets. Interesting. The only team of our pool that's not top 8. Remember, a team below top 8 has never won the championship in the past 15 years. Hasn't happened. I don't know historically how far that would go back, but you might have to go pretty far back before you get a team below that. And then teams on track to win 70% of their games are currently only the Pistons, Thunder, and Spurs. So there's only 3 teams on track to win 70% of their games right now. And then the 3 seeds, the top 3 seeds in both conferences. 3 seeds in the West, OKC, San Antonio, and Denver. And then the 3 seeds in the East are Detroit, Boston, and New York. I just spit a lot of info at you. I know you're not going to remember all that. That's okay. Let me contextualize this for you, and let's break it down a little bit further from there, right? So, this time, I also went back historically, and I went through every champion of the past 15 years, and I found out how many of each barometer they met, right? So, the first time that I did this, I separated every team into tiers. So, whether you meet the first time around, I only used 4 qualifications, but it was whether you met 4 out of 4 qualifications, you were tier 1. If you only met 3 out of 4 qualifications, you were tier 2. So on and so forth. That makes sense. This time, instead of just doing, tiers exactly like that, I wanted to go back and look at all the champions and see. I wanted to see how many of those qualifications that they met. What was like the average number of qualifications met in any given season? I thought that wasn't important to me because this could feel like kind of arbitrary if it's not like, well, yeah, so what if Detroit, for example, or let's pick Denver. So what if Denver only meets 3 out of the 5 qualifications or 2 out of the 5 qualifications you mentioned? They could still win the championship, right? But what I found out, and so I did this to find out if that was actually true or not. And what I found out is that over the past 15 years, I'm sorry if this is getting jumbled, but this will make sense. Over the past 15 years, 7, so almost half, near half of the champions have met 5 out of 5 of these qualifications. That's a lot. So that tells us that oftentimes the teams we see as the most dominant, yeah, they're the ones that win the championship. For example, teams that met 5 out of 5 in all of their previous championship seasons. Last year's OKC team, the 2024 Boston Celtics, the 2018-2019 Toronto Raptors, the 2016-17 Golden State Warriors, the 2014-15 Golden State Warriors, the 2013-14 San Antonio Spurs, right? If you think about these teams and you think about their NBA Finals appearances outside of OKC, I think for the most part, these were pretty dominant championship teams. Teams that kind of cruised to the championship, we felt good about in the regular season, and they ended up winning. So if you meet 5 out of 5 of these qualifications, I'd also be interested to see kind of, and this is just a thought popping in my head, like the teams that lost. Like, was there ever a team that met 5 out of 5 that lost? I'd be interested to know that. I'm not sure. But teams that meet 5 out of 5, you can be pretty damn sure that they have a really good shot to win the title. You know what I mean? And then, so if 7 of the teams won the title with 4 of those, with 5 out of 5 qualifications, we had 5 teams win the title with 4 out of 5 qualifications. So these are plenty of really good teams in here. You know, the 2015-16 Cleveland Cavaliers were 4 out of 5. The 2017-18 Golden State Warriors were actually 4 out of 5 as well. The 2020 Bubble Lakers team was 4 out of 5. That was a good team. So it still matters. So we look at, that's 12 out of 16 teams that need to have at least 4 out of the 5 qualifications. So what's that? That's 75% of the time a champion meets 4 out of 5 of these qualifications, at least in my data pool. And then the rest of the 4 teams only met 3 out of 5. So there were no champions in the past 15 years that only met 2 out of 5. So if right now you meet only 2 out of 5 of these qualifications, for right now you're out to me, because you would be breaking historical precedent. And some of those 3 out of 5 teams were some of the weirder teams, or like, they're just kind of historical anomalies. The 2011 Dallas Mavericks, Dirk's miracle run. The 2023 Denver Nuggets team is pretty weird historically. The 2022 Warriors team is pretty weird historically. Some stuff like that. So now that we have that out of the way, we realize it's most important. It's very indicative that you could and might win the championship almost 50% of the time if you meet 5 out of 5 of these qualifications. Okay? So we're going to go through the teams from the pool I was talking about previously, and we're going to see whether they meet 5 out of 5, 4 out of 5, 3 out of 5, so on and so forth. You know what I mean? You understand it. you get where we're going. So teams that meet 5 out of 5 of these qualifications, there are only 2 of them. The Detroit Pistons are not one of them. It is currently the Oklahoma City Thunder and the San Antonio Spurs. Although, slight, mild caveat, the San Antonio Spurs are not a top 3 net rating team. So they would, if I really wanted to be strict, San Antonio technically does not meet, 5 out of 5 of the qualifications. But those are not, those are the only 2 that meet 5 out of 5. OKC is interesting, and I'm going to talk about these teams in a little bit, so I don't want to talk about them here. OKC has kind of struggled, at least comparatively to their standard and their quality that they attain to. OKC has struggled as of late, but we can still see at this 2/3 mark in the season, they're still a fairly historically dominant team. And I'd say like all of their recent struggles, you could really just throw up to injuries. it's entirely injuries causing their woes, if you will. So I think if OKC were healthy, they would be like so far and away the clear title favorites right now. They would appear so dominant. And it's crazy that they still meet 5 out of 5. And they're technically the only team that meets 5 out of 5 cleanly. Detroit meets 4 out of 5 qualifications. Their offense falls short of top 6, which we will talk about in just a little bit, which is of concern to me. But they still meet 4 out of 5, so theoretically, according to this, they still have a decent chance to theoretically win the championship. And then in Tier 3, which is 3 out of 5, we have New York and we have Boston. Those teams, I think they both lack defenses and the winning percentage. They might both be below 64% win percentages, which no team in the last 15 years has ever won the championship while having a winning percentage below 64. I believe those teams are also both, they are not available for the 40-20 rule. I don't believe. Let me double check that real quick before I just say that. Boston needs to win 4 games in a row to hit 40-20. They are technically have a 65% winning percentage right now, and New York has fallen short of the 40-20 rule. So take that as you will, if you want, if you please. So that means in a tier I have labeled as tier nothing, we have the Denver Nuggets, the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Minnesota Timberwolves, and the Houston Rockets. I'm going to talk about the tier nothing teams for a second, and then we'll talk about New York and Boston maybe for a second, and then Detroit, OKC, and San Antonio in my next segment. I'm going to talk about them exclusively. So the teams in tier nothing, these are teams that I hear, again, media and podcasters throw up as theoretical champions. Denver, for obvious reasons, they took OKC to 7 games last year and gave them so much respect is meant to towards Indiana, but I feel like Denver kind of gave them the hardest time last year. And a lot of people would have said coming into this season that Denver had the second best chance to win the championship coming into the year. They had a really great chance. They could go toe-to-toe with OKC. The problem is right now, due to injuries, vibes, whatever, they just don't meet any historical precedent statistically for a champion. Nikola Jokic's defense has been of particular concern to me this year, and their defense is 24th. That's bad. You're almost bottom 5 in the league in defense. Like, even if you get Aaron Gordon back healthy and Peyton Watson and these guys, they're not taking you from 24 to top 5 or whatever, or maybe even top 10. Like, they are a long, long ways away from a respectable defense, and I just don't see how they get back to one right now. Again, even with their guys healthy, it's just terrible. The vibes aren't great. Jokic's efficiency has been dropping ever since he came back from injury as well, which could be understandable, but I don't know what happens if he doesn't recover to being, maybe the greatest offensive engine we've ever seen in NBA history. It took a very weird year for them to make a run at the title where they barely met the historical standard. Where they barely met the historical standard for them to win a championship. I don't know if I could say in a year where those odds are stacked even further against them in an even more competitive Western and Eastern Conference that, I can confidently believe they could win a championship if Jokic isn't beyond superb on the offensive end and the defense isn't respectable. So, I don't know. I'm kind of out on Denver right now. They'd have to prove a lot of things to me. They just lost to the Clippers tonight, too, which is pretty brutal for them. They do not meet the 40-20 rule. I think they are at risk of falling out of their current 3 seed. No, they're the 4 seed. With their loss tonight, Houston leapt them. So if they don't maintain that top 3 seed, well, what does that tell us? They're not going to win the championship this year. Cleveland, I've talked a lot about Cleveland this year. Very disappointed in how their season has gone. I liked the James Harden move for them, but if you want to talk about playoff history, well, maybe James Harden isn't the best guy to pick up if you want to make a deep run into the playoffs. It may all be a little too late for Cleveland this year, especially with the uncertain health of Max Strus, who is quite important to them, and their lack of wings and defenders on the perimeter. I just don't see it this year, even with the moves they made late in the season. Minnesota is a big team that I hear people talk about as a dark horse. Again, all statistical, most of these statistics display to us that no, they're just not in that tier of contender. They're too wishy-washy. They're too hit and miss. I just don't know if I believe in their attitude and consistency and defense in the playoffs, or even the offense for that matter. I love Anthony Edwards, who doesn't, but there's just something that team is quite missing that I don't think they have that can take them all the way to the promised land. They've had, in their past 2 Western Conference Finals runs, a lot of injury luck go their way, a lot of playoff matchups work out right, and then they kind of just get washed in the Western Conference Finals. So are they all of a sudden going to break historical precedent? They're going to figure out their consistency issues, and they're going to figure out how to win more than just 2 playoff series? You got to think they got to get to the Western Conference Finals again, 3rd year in the row, and then they got to win the Western Conference Finals, and then they have to win the finals. They have a long way to go, and I just don't feel comfortable crowning them as really a cream of the crop possible championship contender, even dark horse. I don't care about the word dark horse. There aren't dark horse, again, just historically, I've said that, I'm going to say this a million times. There are not dark horse championship contenders. It usually ends up being a team that we could identify easily with statistical precedent. Okay? So, sorry, that's a little bit of an angry rant from me about the Timberwolves. I didn't mean to unleash hate on them, but I do kind of hate when people just lump them in as made 2 Western Conference Finals. They could be, a dark horse candidate. No, they can't, because dark horse doesn't happen. But whatever. Moving on. The Houston Rockets. Houston Rockets are an abject mess. That team kind of stinks. We have the KDF files going on right now. That guy literally might be calling his teammates slurs in group chats. The GM of that team also, by the way, if you missed, I'm blanking on his name, but what he said after the trade deadline. But basically, he was just Fred VanVleet's not coming back this season, so we're just gonna punt. It's not gonna work for us this year. And I agree, they're not gonna win the championship. That team kind of stinks. So that's tier nothing. We can talk about underrated NBA champions or blah 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 whatever, but they would have to break a lot of rules to get there. So I don't know if I believe in that, Chuck. I gotta be honest. And then if we're talking about the tier 3 teams, New York and Boston, New York to me just the defensive matchups are too easy to target in New York. And I just don't believe in Karl-Anthony Towns and Jalen Brunson being able to lead you to the promised land. Again, just the defensive cross-matching that you can do against them to put them out of position. I don't know. And if they have any sort of injury to Mitchell Robinson, some of their more important role players, it's over. So I just don't really believe in New York at all at this point. And then Boston's super interesting. They've been a super great story all year. I was so wrong about them. You know what I mean? Preseason, I thought they were going to be terrible, below 500. I thought they should just tank and see if they could recoup an interesting draft asset. But I've been wrong. They've been very good. Jaylen Brown has been very, very good. Much, much, much better than I thought he was going to be. And I'm completely wrong about that. I'm willing to say it. That being said, Do I trust Jaylen Brown's historical outlier efficiency to carry into the playoffs? Perhaps not, TBH. And even if Jason Tatum comes back, I don't want to have this conversation. That dude's going to be coming off an Achilles tear and coming off of one really soon, pretty much faster than anyone's ever seemingly healed from an Achilles tear in NBA history. I don't trust that guy to be Jason Tatum again. It's going to take until next season before he's Jason Tatum again. So you're going to be relying on Jaylen Brown to carry you, and I just don't know if Jaylen Brown is tier 1 heliocentric enough to carry an offense like that. And if the offense drops off for Boston, the defense, they have a lot of unproven playoff guys on that roster. I don't know what their playoff rotation looks like. Boston's a good feel-good story, despite the fact that they were a team that won a championship 2 years ago. But even still, I just don't see it with them this year. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before. So if I am, hey, I'll be wrong about Boston again. I'll make that bet. But let's talk about the next 3 teams, which I will come out and say are really the only 3 teams that I think can win the championship this year. It's the Detroit Pistons, the San Antonio Spurs, and the OKC Thunder. Again, I said it before, but history is not wrong. History is not wrong. Stats do not lie. These are the teams with the best chance to win the championship. And with that, I'm going to transition to the next part of this podcast, the last part of this podcast, where I want to talk about the 3 most important X factors going down the end of the season and into this playoff. And spoiler alert, they tie in to those 3 teams because those are the only 3 teams of consequence. If those are the only 3 teams that can win a championship, then they're the 3 that matter the most when we're talking about X factors. So let's move on to the last part of this podcast. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about these X factors. Let's talk about these X factors real quick. If you have any questions, thoughts, concerns, or whatever about what I said in the last 25, 30 minutes, however long that was, please let me know in the contacts, or feel free to reach out to me for more clarity. Most of you, I'm very, very reachable. I'm very open to being reached by anybody who is curious, and I'm willing to explain myself. I know I've said this a million times, very insecure about it, but I hope I explained my thought process clearly enough, and it wasn't too muddled, and it makes sense. Because that's the whole goal, is to make some sense, okay? So let's talk about X factors, right? I've made a list of 3, 1 for each team. I've ranked them in order of importance. Some of them take a little bit of liberty with X factor. You'll see what I mean. But let's talk about the number 1, numero uno, most importante X factor, okay? What's number 1? What do you think it is? I'm a Thunder fan. What do you think it is? Yeah, you guessed right. It's health for OKC. The most important X factor going into the playoffs is whether OKC is going to be healthy or not. I don't know the answer to that. We could slim this down to whether Jalen Williams will be at 100% by playoff time. He's struggling with some hamstring stuff over the past month. He's also, he had the wrist surgery in the offseason, which takes about 9 months to really heal fully, and he's never looked like he came back completely right from. But really, it's the rest of the team struggling with injuries too. A.J. Mitchell's been out for a while now with an abdominal strain. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was diagnosed with an abdominal strain right before the All-Star break, and he is set to miss another week of basketball before being reevaluated, unfortunately. Isaiah Hartenstein has missed a lot of games. Alex Caruso has missed a lot of games. Chet has peppered in some missed games here and there. If OKC is not healthy and they are Like if OKC is missing Isaiah Hartenstein or Jalen Williams in the playoffs, they will lose. Plain and simple. And obviously, if they're missing Shea, they will lose. If OKC does not have their roster healthy and available to them, they will not win the championship. It's plain as simple as that. And I truly think if OKC's roster is healthy, if Jalen Williams is at 90 to 95% or even 100% of himself, if Isaiah Hartenstein is completely good to go, if Shea Gilgeous-Alexander is completely good to go, this team has like an 80% chance to win the title. I just don't know who can match them. They have the championship experience now. The rest of the West and the playoff race seems so muddled. The other two top teams that I just talked about in San Antonio and Detroit have very little playoff experience. Detroit has one first-round series that they lost. That's it. And San Antonio has no playoff experience. Like, if OKC is healthy, they will be 100% the favorite and almost a lock for me to win the championship. If they're not healthy, it's up for grabs. That's just how I feel. And that's what we've been shown throughout this season. OKC has their guys, which, like, they've had their starting lineup for 5 minutes this season, maybe their preferred starting lineup. But even, I don't think there's ever been a point, there's definitely not been a point where they've had their full 15-man roster. But even just having 13 of their 15 guys, I don't, that's maybe happened in one game this year. If that. So that's just the big thing to me. Will OKC and people will do all this shit because they're gonna, Shea's gonna miss another week. They might lose another game or two over the next week. If Shea misses more time, if J-Dub misses a bunch of time, if Isaiah Hartenstein misses a bunch of time going down this season and OKC loses, let's say even like 10 more games or something, people are going to start panicking about the Thunder. And it's so goddamn stupid to me because it's so obvious the way that their injuries impact their overall success. They went out and got guys like Isaiah Hartenstein to specifically address their rebounding and their ball movement issues and their rim defense outside of Chet Holmgren. If they're missing him, which is a vital part of their team, yeah, they're going to get out-rebounded. The rim defense is going to look worse. They have one of their best playmakers off the floor. Like, no shit, they're not winning games, man. Some of this stuff has gone a little crazy with me with OKC this season because everybody's freaking out with all the recent losses and whatnot. But I've said this all year. If OKC is not healthy, they won't win. And if they are healthy, they'll probably win. That's the coin flip. So that's a big thing for me to watch. Can they get right? Can they stay healthy? I think they should just rest a shit ton of their guys going down the end of this year. I think it's important for them to try to get home court throughout the entirety of the playoffs. It was very important for them last year. I think it's important for them to maintain the 1 seed. It's important for them to maintain the 1 seed in the West. But they should not compromise those things at the sake of their health. Their health is the most important thing. So I think I've done enough ranting on this. That's my number one X factor. We'll see what happens with them going down the home stretch here. The second most important X factor to me is I'm cheating a little bit. I'm kind of picking two things, but I'm also kind of picking two things. The San Antonio Spurs. I'm paying attention to the Steph Castle cross-matching and Wemby's conditioning. Whether Wemby can stay healthy and play a ton of minutes and play a ton of games, we have yet to be seen over his NBA career here. He's had some unfortunate injuries, the weird blood clot thing last year, and then, an injury around the December mark this year. When he came back, he was basically on a minutes restriction, and he came off the bench for a while. It'll just, because we haven't seen it in the playoffs yet, and we haven't seen it really in his career, can he stay healthy and play a ton of minutes for a really long time? If he can't, the Spurs won't win, obviously. If he can, though, I'm paying attention to the way that teams guard Steph Castle. The NBA playoffs, outside of, whatever, the whole convoluted offensive defensive rating ranking bullshit that I did, outside of that, to me, is becoming more and more about your weakest links, right? It used to be a bit about your strongest and thinking about like the Miami Big Three era where it's like, let's just have the three best players that we can and we'll figure out the rest. Well, now a lot of it's coming down to, what are your biggest weaknesses? Like, do you have a link in the chain that you can target either offensively or defensively? And for the Spurs, there's been a lot of interesting stuff recently, I think, where teams are trying to cross-match to take away some of the advantage, because you can't put a center on Wemby. You really can't. Like, he's just going to cook big guys for the most part. Occasionally, you can have spot minutes where it happens, but if you try to put a center on Wemby for an entire series, I don't think it'll work. So teams have been poking around, trying to figure out who can you put a center on, who can you cross-match them on the Spurs in order to help provide help defense from typically your best weak side rim protector and biggest help defender. Where can you park them? For a while, it was Harrison Barnes. Team would start parking their bigs on Harrison Barnes, and Harrison Barnes' shooting just kind of dropped off to a point where they had to take him out of the starting lineup, and they inserted Julian Champagnie. And now teams have been experimenting with putting a big on Steph Castle. The Suns did it tonight. If you go watch that game, they put Mark Williams on Steph Castle for a lot of that game, and especially to start it off. They're basically just daring Steph Castle to create and get downhill, because he's not a guy that's going to pull up on big men from the three-point line. Like, teams will just make that bet. He's not a good pull-up shooter at all. Steph Castle is great around the rim, and he's big and strong and can get downhill, but if he's trying to do that against bigs in outside of a pick-and-roll situation, like, teams are just going to switch on it. It creates a whole host of issues, right? So opposing teams are betting that by putting a big man on Steph Castle, you can provide enough help defense on Wembanyama to neutralize his scoring threat and his capabilities around the rim. And they're trusting that Steph Castle is not going to hit his jumpers and he's not going to be able to efficiently drive to the rim. Or if, let's say, they make Steph Castle the pick-and-roll ball handler and they bring Wemby in to set a screen or something, well, the guy who's screening on Wemby is either going to just fight through the screen or, sorry. Excuse me, I messed this up. The big who is getting screened by Wembanyama or whoever is either just going to fight through that screen and duck under it because Steph Castle can't pull up, or teams are just going to be able to switch that. And by having a smaller yet still versatile guy on Wembanyama, you can easily just switch out onto Steph Castle and you've accomplished basically nothing. Sorry, I'm trying to talk X's and O's, and sometimes I get like jumbled up and my brain is thinking faster than I'm talking. Basically what I'm saying is that teams are going to see what they can do to neutralize certain players on the floor for the Spurs, and they're going to pick at the links in the chain and see what works. And the link in the chain that they're picking on right now is Steph Castle, and I want to see what the results of that are. Going into the playoffs, what are the Spurs' counters for that, and how effective is it really? Steph Castle had an awesome game against the Suns tonight. The Spurs killed the Suns, so that cross-matching moment didn't really work all that well now, did it? But I don't know. Who knows? Maybe a week from now, things could be different. We shall see. And also in a playoff setting, like, we are going to see that 1,000%. Teams always see these. They're always going to see these interesting mashups. And I just want to know whether Steph Castle is the Spurs' Josh Giddey or their Josh Hart, guys that opposing teams just park a big on and then neutralize the paint. Is Steph Castle that, or is he better than that? That might be the make or break thing for the Spurs going into the playoffs. So we shall see. My final most important X factor, and I listed that as more important than the Pistons, just because technically the Spurs are the only other team that meet 5 out of 5 criteria. So technically, if I'm going by a strict ranking scale, they are a better contender than Detroit right now. Technically speaking. Okay? The third most important X factor to me is, can the Pistons play their best players, their 5 best players on the floor together at once? This is very similar to the Spurs thing, and where I think the Pistons have a bit of a cross-matching problem, or just a problem on offense that I don't know that they know how to solve. And I want to liken this Pistons team again to the 23-24 Thunder. So that was a team that won like 57 games. That was Jalen Williams' second year. That was Chet Holmgren's rookie year. That was Josh Giddey's third year, right? SGA finishes second in MVP. OKC is first in the West. And they lose to Dallas in the second round. I just get a lot of vibes that this Pistons team is like that, right? This Pistons team goes from very, very bad to all of a sudden like, hey, they're in the playoffs. And OKC went from very, very bad to, hey, they're in the play-in. And then they lost the play-in, right? But I think OKC, the year they were in the play-in, won like 40 games. And the Pistons last year probably won like 44 games or something. So very similar records. And then they come in the next year, and they're the 1 seed, and they're kicking ass, but they're inexperienced, and they have some obvious flaws on the roster. This Pistons team has some flaws on the roster, and it's the shooting, it's the offense, it's the floor spacing. It's just really easy to kind of gunk them up, and they've been so good this season about they have different outs that OKC team didn't have. For example, like this Pistons team is just an awesome rebounding team, so they can get plenty of second chances and opportunities on the defensive boards that OKC team really struggled with. They got out-rebounded, and this Pistons team just like kicks ass and has like a demeanor that they just want to win games, and they're awesome in clutch time and all this stuff, right? But this Pistons team feels very similar to that OKC team, just in that they're a young team. I don't want to say playing above their head, but they're kind of like shocking the league, right? They're doing all this. they're playing very well. They're going to be the 1 seed easily in the East, and right now they might be the team with the best record in the NBA. That's very possible. And yet still, when you watch them on the court, there's a lot of flaws that immediately jump out to you. And there's a lot of things. Again, just the offense can be really rough sometimes. And I'm kind of scared going into the playoffs what that's going to look like. I also think there's a lot of guys on the Pistons roster that I don't know if you can play them in the playoffs, like Javonte Green, Dennis Jenkins, Kevin Huerter, Duncan Robinson. How many of those guys can you reliably play in the playoffs? And then, they're a couple of their best players really just can't function on the floor together in the playoffs. The couple primary guys being Jalen Duren and Asar Thompson. We saw the Knicks last year do a lot to gunk up the Pistons offense when Asar and Duren were on the floor. Now, Duren is much better this year than he was last year, but still, those two in combination on the floor, they're two of their 3 or 4 best players, but it just kind of felt impossible to play them together and have the semblance of a good offense, let alone an offense that can win a championship. So if you can't play 4 of your best guys on the court at the same time, and if you have links that are that weak, or that easy to scheme around, I don't know how to project a ton of playoff success for you outside of the fact that the rest of the field is just really meh. So that's a big thing I'm watching is do teams? I'm super. I think the Pistons are going to play OKC twice. I'm super interested to see how OKC defends them, and then just we haven't seen an offensive leap from Asar this year. So going down the stretch here, what kind of lineups and what kind of combinations can the Pistons put on the floor to try and find some semblance of a decent offense? The other problem for the Pistons is they need to play floor spacers like Duncan Robinson and Kevin Huerter to give Cade the space to work and get downhill and be in the pick and roll like he does. They have to play those guys with him. Their best lineups this year all include Duncan Robinson, right? They need floor spacing. But can Duncan Robinson really hold up defensively in a playoff series? Like, especially if they get the wrong matchup, maybe against, like, I could see, maybe Boston again. Could be a tough matchup for the Pistons if they just run it. All right, I think I am all wrapped up now. I am all tuckered out. I am tired of talking. My mouth is very dry. So I think I'm going to wrap stuff up here. Hopefully you appreciate some of the things that I said. If you disagree, agree, or maybe mildly agree with anything that I said, well, go ahead and feel free to let me know in the comments, okay? I hope that this episode made sense to you, and I hope I could explain myself clearly enough. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it to this point in the video or the podcast, go ahead and leave a review. If you are on Apple or Spotify, I have 0 reviews, so if you want to leave one, that'd be pretty dope, I suppose. If you're watching this on YouTube, please feel free to subscribe. Share this with any friends or family, anybody you think might enjoy it. And I truly do hope to catch you all in the next one. Okay, goodbye.